This is one of the reasons why Americans can't really get into soccer, football. I theorize that it's because of this rule, because of this unbelievably complicated and difficult to understand rule of the offside, which is like, it seems to be more art than science calling it. But what do you think? I've tried to figure it out. There's different opinions from people that seem to be respectable football observers. What do you think?
Look, I think one thing that I've always in my career as a football journalist, and also as someone with a background in law, is I tell people, listen, they're called laws of the game for a reason. They're not rules, they're laws of the game, and you're supposed to read them like legal statutes, and you're supposed to apply them accordingly. But the offside law, which is law 11, is crystal clear here.
An action-packed weekend in the Middle East as well as in the United States, where the World Cup unfolded. Lots of questions about rules. What does the memorandum of understanding say about who actually controls the Strait of Hormuz? Who actually controls the passageway to the Persian Gulf? Is it that Iran has control over it? Is it that it's free for everyone to get control over it? A little bit of ambiguity in the language there. And there's also lots of questions about rules in soccer or football, with the Iranian team knocked out of the tournament, of the World Cup tournament, amid a controversial call using the video referee tool that has become increasingly popular in the sport. Basically, the Iranian team appeared to have won the game. There were celebrations in Seattle and across the world. And then the VAR, the video assisted referee tool, essentially nixed that goal. It turned the game between Egypt and Iran into a draw and basically knocked the Iranians out of the tournament. I am Borzu Dergahi. This is my podcast. It's called Badlands, and you can subscribe at borzu.substack.com. You can also find me on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify. And this is really important because I've been trying to get some progress on the numbers here on YouTube. So if you could subscribe on YouTube, that would be so awesome. That would be awesome. And you know what else is awesome? Today's show, I think, is pretty good. I have an interview later today with Nima Tavallaei. We're going to break down what happened in the World Cup, why Iran lost, whether that was a good call or not by the referees, disallowing that goal that would have given Iran the win and would have elevated it to the second round, the knockout stage in the World Cup for the first time in its history. We break it down and we talk about other aspects of the game and Iran's treatment by the United States during the tournament. I also have a bunch of interviews about another big event this weekend, the seeming collapse or degradation of this ceasefire between the United States and Iran. It seems like several times this weekend there have been attacks by Iran on ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz and subsequent retaliation by the United States on sites inside Iran. This is becoming a regular occurrence. We're going to discuss in a few interviews that I did over the weekend. I did a bunch of interviews over the weekend with various television channels, primarily NewsX and Algeria 24. But I also did a bunch of radio interviews that I'm not going to bother you with. There was a lot of curiosity about whether this is the end of the ceasefire, whether the relationship between the United States and Iran is going to get even worse. So basically, I think that this is just going to go on for months and months and months. As I have said before, there's not going to be any clean resolution. There's never anything clean in this world anymore when it comes to these kinds of armed conflicts. It's always messy, and the resolutions will always be unsatisfactory to everybody, just like the World Cup, just like the games that people play in football pitches, the games people play in battlegrounds this year. There's never a rah-rah moment. Iran did do well in the conflict, but Iran remains a second-rate power and so is subject to the whims of the first-rate powers, and that in this case is the United States. There's also other things going on. There's a negotiation going on between Israel and Lebanon that really undermines the Iranian position with regard to the Strait of Hormuz, as well as its insistence that the interests of Hezbollah, its proxy ally in Lebanon, be taken into account in any final resolution of the situation in southern Lebanon, where Israel continues to occupy a significant chunk of land and also continues to fire away. I talked a little bit about how the duel in the Gulf continues with Iran and the U.S. vying for power and position with regard to the Strait of Hormuz. Anyway, listen in to the following interviews, and please, if you get a chance, let me know what you think.
These strikes have not essentially led to the entire world believing that the MOU that was signed can now come into fruition. What more can you tell us about how these strikes sabotage that MOU?
I don't think they completely sabotage them yet. Both the United States and Iran have an interest in maintaining some semblance of peace. The United States because it doesn't want to totally derail the world economy, and Iran because it doesn't want to suffer further war damage. So there's going to be this kind of low-level tempo of violations. I think a lot of this is a certain level of machismo in both Iran and the United States right now. You have this kind of braggadocio, toxic masculinity, if you will, in charge and dominant. And there's going to be attempts on the parts of both countries to push the envelope, to test red lines, and to see what they can get away with. Iran with regard to maintaining some semblance of control over the Persian Gulf shipping, and the United States with regard to disregarding certain parts of the memorandum of understanding. And that includes, for example, not ceding any kind of nominal control over the Strait of Hormuz to the Iranians, and also not permanently enforcing a peace in Lebanon as stipulated in Item 1 of that Memorandum of Understanding.
And yes, as far as Lebanon is concerned, Mr. Dargahi, we have seen some reports that when it comes down to Iran, they want the U.S. to essentially try and push Israel to come out of those southern borders, but that hasn't been the case as well, and that is a violation of that first clause of the MOU. Do you believe that that is another factor that then can in time further sabotage the MOU?
I think it could, but there's a really complicating factor in it as well, in that Israel and Lebanon are forging their own agreement, and there's this separate, parallel almost peace track going on between Israel and Lebanon. The argument goes, how can Iran be more Catholic than the Pope? How can Iran say that Lebanon should do this and Lebanon should be this way when the legitimate, internationally recognized government of Lebanon, of which Iran's partner Hezbollah is a part of that government, they endorse that government. How can they, Iranians, say that the situation in Lebanon has not been resolved when even in the Lebanese government, they're saying that they're resolving it? On the other hand, Hezbollah itself right now is saying that, no, they don't accept this agreement. They don't accept this parallel diplomatic track. And so those arguments are going to continue, Roshan, for months and months and months. You're going to have repeated attacks. You're going to have news reports saying that the peace agreement is in dire jeopardy, but really nothing is going to happen, at least not until November when the U.S. midterm elections take place. After that, all bets are off.
There have been repercussions for not just the stock market, but the global economy as well. Do you believe that Trump and Iran essentially are not that interested in what these ripple effects are and are solely concerned on their own reputation and their own sort of economies?
No, I think that the global economy is so interconnected that Donald Trump has to be concerned about other countries as well. For example, if you look at the stock market and follow it closely, when Asian markets are down and the tech sector is dragging in Asia, in Hong Kong and Shanghai, and even in Bombay, it will impact the U.S. markets when they open later on. And oil markets are completely globalized. So there's no selfishness when it comes to that. And even in the case of Iran, you mentioned this visit by Arakchi to Iraq and meeting with Iraqi officials, senior Iraqi officials. There is no country that is more hurt right now by the closure of the Strait of Hormuz than Iraq, which has one little port on the Persian Gulf and one way to get its exports out to the rest of the world. And so Iran and Iraq are not only neighbors, they're supposedly partners of some sort. They're both Shia majority countries. And meanwhile, Iran's closure of the Strait of Hormuz is hurting Iraq. And Iraq is not like Kuwait and United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. It's not a rich country. It's a rather impoverished country still, and a rather very heavily populated one. And so this war really impacts that country. And so I think that both countries can't afford, neither the United States nor Iran can they afford to just be selfish about the economic impact of this conflict.
President Donald Trump has asked for an additional $70 billion with regards to the Iranian war. He's also essentially met with defense contractors, I believe, to ramp up military capabilities with regards to Iran. When it comes down to U.S. debt, doesn't this lead to more inflation within the U.S. economy as well, which signals otherwise in the sense that President Donald Trump is not catering to the U.S. public? And do you believe that that will then have a ripple effect on how the midterm elections will go? What more can you tell us?
First of all, I would say that the defense expenditures are not necessarily for Iran. It will take years for those Tomahawk cruise missiles and those interceptors and those THAAD missile systems that were used up in the recent conflict to be restored and replenished. So I think the concern there is more about Asia and other theaters of potential conflict. And, as to the broader issue of inflation, yeah, this is a problem. As an American, I can assure you that this is something that really upsets me all the time, too. The fact that the United States spends money that it doesn't have, issuing debt that it probably shouldn't issue. And this has become a major political issue. It is causing a lot of turmoil, inflation in the United States, the increasing prices of everything in the United States that are driving up the prices of everything worldwide. This is becoming a global issue as well. And so, yes, the fact that the United States is so deeply in debt and so dependent on its lenders in the long run is not only an economic issue, it also will shortly become a national security issue.
Now, of course, we have seen some latest strikes hitting at Syriac port in Iran as sort of retaliation for some previous strikes that were directed towards some ships taking an unauthorized route through the Strait of Hormuz, as according to what Iran has said. Bozu, do you think that these strikes may put the MOU at risk, or are these just strikes signaling military strength between Iran and the United States?
I don't think they help. I don't think it's going to make the situation any better. It will make the mistrust even more, the tension even more. I think that the Iranians and the Americans are both trying to push the envelope a little bit. The United States by pushing these ships to go through this route, and Iran by attacking this particular ship as a signal to the U.S. and to the international community that it will maintain de facto control over the Strait of Hormuz. This is a test of wills. It's a little bit about bragging rights. I think that there is a little bit of pushing of the envelope. You have a certain kind of macho, chauvinistic militarism at display here. This is not a helpful effort on the part of both of these countries. As J.D. Vance himself pointed out, Iran could have just picked up the phone if it had a problem with an issue. It didn't need to attack a ship. And the United States, too, it should act more as the adult in the room, since it pretends to be the leader of the free world. It could have also picked up the phone. I think there's also still ongoing disputes and mistrust because item 1 of the memorandum of understanding, the one that requires fighting in Lebanon to stop, had still not come into compliance or full effect. And so I think Iran could conceivably argue that because of that issue of Lebanon, it will continue to restrict the flow of traffic through Hormuz. But I don't even think that is a very good argument either.
Now, Bozu, of course, when we do look at some of these latest strikes that have happened, you did say that we have seen this parallel agreement also put in place. Now, do you think that we will see some of these strikes calm down now that there is this agreement that's been put between Lebanon and Israel? Of course, Iran has stipulated, and it's in the very first point of the MOU, that there needs to be a regional calm for the rest of the points to follow, saying that's a crucial aspect. Do you think that we will see perhaps some sort of calm return, even though Hezbollah has really rejected this deal that's been agreed to by Israel and Lebanon?
There's just so many people in this equation, so many players and actors who want the deal to fail. I think that there's a really good chance that there'll be way more little bouts like this, little outbreaks of fighting in the coming weeks and months than there will be a return to total calm. Because if you just look at the equation of people in Tehran, people in Israel, people in Washington who want this agreement not to work, I think there's a lot of possibility for a derailment, at least temporarily. But the bottom line is both the leadership in the United States and in Iran don't want to return to the full-scale fighting that we had in March. They realized that it was pointless. It didn't really accomplish much for the Americans. It set back the American aims. And Iran, too, doesn't want to suffer any more damage. So the broad outlines are there. It's just that there's a lot of possibilities that things will go wrong.
What do you predict will take political priority for some of these countries going forward? Of course, Iran has de facto control over the Strait of Hormuz at the moment, and any kind of resumption in hostilities may put that at jeopardy. But of course, the US is looking at the economic aspect of it as well, and political aspect. Israel, of course, has its own political domestic dynamics as well. You mentioned that all of these actors do have their own domestic factors as well. How do you think that some of these interests might clash in these countries, but also within each other as well?
So the United States has an interest in maintaining some semblance of peace and keeping oil prices down before November. After November, all bets are off, because that's when the midterm elections will take place. Meanwhile, Israel has the opposite goal in mind. They want to, the government of Benjamin Netanyahu wants to return to some kind of war or some kind of hostility between the parties before October, because that's when Benjamin Netanyahu has to face his election prospects. So there's a real clash there. And meanwhile, with regard to Iran, they just mistrust. They are certain in some ways that there is going to be a return to some kind of war. They're acting with the presumption that this is just a temporary, that this is just a trick, that they're basically waiting out Donald Trump until he accomplishes either his political goals or restores his munition supplies, and then he'll start attacking again. And so they're essentially, they have their finger on the trigger as well. And so there's a lot of tension there. On the other hand, Iran can't be seen to be pushing the region into war by its own people, because while there is a lot of patience there when the perception is that Iran is under attack, if there is a perception that Iran is pushing the attack, that is pushing the envelope, provoking attacks, then the people will turn against the regime.
US President Donald Trump has praised the killing of Iranian military commander Qasem Soleimani, claiming that Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and others in Iran were relieved by his death because they feared him. Was the Iranian administration indeed scared of Qasem Soleimani, or do you think this is projecting from Donald Trump?
I think it's completely absurd. If you looked at the video footage of the funerals after the assassination of Qasem Soleimani in 2020, it showed just how popular he was. I think there's a little bit of wish casting here on the part of Trump, as in he wishes he had stopped there, because that was a very popular move, the assassination, and it brought on accolades from even some of his political enemies. But then he joined in Israel during the 2025 12-day war and used bunker busters against Iranian nuclear sites. That was highly controversial. And then, making matters worse, he took part in this war. He launched this war in February against Iran, which was extremely unpopular. So he's trying to bring the attention back to the one thing that he perceives he did on Iran that was widely popular. But look, there's a lot of propaganda about what happened with the killing of Qasem Soleimani, that was such a great thing. But the bottom line is that Qasem Soleimani was someone who brought some measure of control and order to a system in the Middle East that has become more and more chaotic. They took out a person of his stature, even if he was rather dangerous to U.S. interests, and things didn't get better. Things got worse. The Iraqi Shia militias got even wilder. The Houthis created even more problems, to the point where the U.S. had to go to war with the Houthis in early 2025. So if it helped anything, I don't know what it helped. If you look objectively, since his killing, things have only gotten worse in this part of the world. I also spoke in an interview with Algeria's 24-hour English language news channel about what this whole situation means for the Gulf countries and how they view it. I also spoke with them about whether the football diplomacy will have any impact on the real diplomacy, or will the real diplomacy improve matters for Iran's team when it comes to football. I don't think it will have a lot of impact.
So from the region's perspective, is the current ceasefire between Washington and Tehran being perceived, Mr. Dargai?
Thank you so much for having me, Miriam. I think most of the countries in the region, especially in the Gulf, as well as like Pakistan, Turkey, and Egypt, they're kind of relieved that this ceasefire is in place. The war was not doing anything good for them. I think there is, however, a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of nervousness as to whether the ceasefire is going to hold. And I think there's a lot of division as well within especially the Gulf countries. On the one hand, you have the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain and Kuwait. They're a little bit closer to the U.S. and Israeli position. And on the other hand, you have Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Oman. And I wouldn't say that they're closer to the Iranian position at all, but I would say that they're pursuing a much more independent foreign policy with regard to the issues pertaining to Gulf security and the Iranian regime. They're basically trying to make their own way. They feel very much betrayed by the United States for failing to, one, prevent this war from happening, which basically benefited in the end no one really, not even the Israeli advocates of the conflict. It didn't even benefit Israel in the end. On the one hand, they're angry at that, but they're also upset at the fact that the U.S. conduct during the conflict was not to their liking. The United States did not really protect those countries where it had bases. It moved its interceptors and defense systems to Israel and did not allow them to stay in the Gulf region. It did not really move to defend the bases that it held. It basically evacuated them and left the Gulf mostly on its own.
Is Tehran simply defending its strategic interests, or is it sending a broader message that no future Gulf security architecture can succeed without Iranian participation?
No, any future security structure for the Persian Gulf will have to include Iran. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. Iran is the most massive country that is abutting the Persian Gulf. It is the largest literal state in terms of population and in terms of coastline. So if Iran says no to any security arrangement, it's not going to work. And as for the Strait of Hormuz, the problem is that Iran perceives itself as having won the war. And even many people in the West and even Israel say that Iran won the war. And as they say, to the victor goes the spoils. And they have taken control of the Strait of Hormuz, and it's going to take some huge steps and some huge differences and different security structures and security guarantees for Iran to relent. And you know what? Iran may still not relent on the control over the Strait of Hormuz. This might be a permanent thing. They're going to want nominal, if not actual, control over that Strait of Hormuz for a while. They see the war that was inflicted upon them as largely staged from the Gulf. And one of the things that they're going to argue, and perhaps credibly, is that they don't want U.S. or other warships entering the Persian Gulf, especially after the surprise attack that the U.S. launched against Iran on February 28th.
Could an event like the FIFA World Cup create political incentives for both Washington and Tehran to preserve this fragile, at least in the short term?
Football is a huge deal in Iran, much bigger proportionally in Iran than in the United States. And this is something that is really lifting the spirits of the Iranian people. But I don't think it's going to lead to any diplomatic breakthroughs. I think diplomatic breakthroughs, if they happen, could lead to a flowering of football diplomacy in the United States, and there be an appearance of better relations between the two countries. But I don't think the game itself, even though the game is improving the image of the Iranians in the United States and worldwide, like, for example, the conduct of Team Melli, the Iranian national team, has really charmed a lot of pundits and Americans, and on social media, there's a lot of praise for the way that the Iranian team has handled itself and the grace, despite the pressure it has shown in Los Angeles and in Seattle. I think that that could be good for Iran's public image in the country and in the world, but it's not going to affect this regime. This government in Washington doesn't care about football. They are meat and potatoes kind of guys. They don't care about soccer. It's not going to, first of all, it's not their sport of choice. And second of all, this is not something that they are going to be warm. It's not going to warm their heart. They're going to be just as aggressive and assertive about what they see as U.S. rights and privileges, regardless of what happens on the football pitch. And now my interview with Nima Taballai. He is a noted journalist covering football. He's a sports journalist specializing in Iranian and Italian football and soccer. Have a listen. So the offsides that shook the world, or at least shook Iran and shook football. What did you think? Was this a legit offside? And I got to ask this because this is one of the reasons I'll tell you this. This is one of the reasons why Americans can't really get into the football, to soccer, football, and I theorize that it's because of this rule, because of this unbelievably complicated and difficult to understand rule of the offside, which is like, it seems to be more art than science calling it. But what do you think? I've tried to figure it out. There's different opinions from people that seem to be respectable football observers. What do you think?
Look, I think one thing that I've always in my career as a football journalist, and also as someone with a background in law, is I tell people, listen, they're called laws of the game for a reason. They're not rules, they're laws of the game, and you're supposed to read them like legal statutes, and you're supposed to apply them accordingly. The offside law, which is law 11, is crystal clear here. It is offside. When the ball is played towards goal, and one of your teammates is in an offside position, and the offside position is also clearly defined, then it's offside, no matter if it's by a toe, by any part of your body that is legal to score a goal with, which means your hands and arms don't count because it's not legal to score with your hands and arms. So shoulders, backsides, like we saw against Belgium, toe, head, whatever. If you're in offside position when the ball is played from your teammate, you're offside. And that's what happened to Shoja Khalilzadeh, who was very unlucky. He was he was offside by just a whisker. But look, so I think, and it's funny because every single referee, I've seen Iranian referees explain this in Farsi. I've seen Iranian referees explain this in English. I've spoken to my own contacts within the refereeing world. I spoke to a friend of mine who teaches referees at the AFC, the Asian Confederation, and he confirmed everything that I thought. It's like it's just that's just the laws of the game. Like there's no scandal here, and immediately on social media you see these people, who content farm and interaction farm, and they like edit the photos to make it look like it wasn't, and it's like, it's just no. And there is a scandal at this World Cup, but it's got nothing to do with the referees. We'll get to the
broader scandal. Yeah. Okay, now the other question I have, still on the same note. Now, apparently the referee on the field did not call this offside. It was only later with VAR that it was determined to be an offside. What do you think of that? Is that legit? Should they have just let this crucial moment pass?
They can't. Like,
because the Egyptian side requested the VAR?
Apparently? No. The VAR, video assistant, like the VAR protocol is crystal clear. When it comes to offside, they have to look at it. If it is an offside, because an offside is an absolute. It's one of the few things in football that's absolute. It's either offside or onside. So therefore, the referee doesn't have to look at it. Unless, like yesterday when Ghana played Croatia, where a player was in an offside position, but it was an interpretation whether or not he impacted play. Then the referee has to go and look at the screen and say, because then it becomes a call. Did he impact play? Yes, he was in an offside position, but did he impact play? The VAR can't decide that. The referee has to decide that. And
in this case, did the offside impact play?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, the player who scored the goal was in an offside position.
I see.
So, I understand that this can get really technical, but I really just urge people who are interested in football to learn.
So, Nima, I thought you were kind of a radical, but it turns out in the end you're very much an institutionalist. I respect.
No, I'm not. No, I'm really not. What I am.
No, but I respect that, I gotta say.
No, but listen, what I am is someone who, look, the laws are clear. They apply to everyone equally. And if you don't like the laws of the game, then there is a window to change them. It starts in June. It ends in August, before the season begins. That's when IFAB, who set the laws of the game, determine which changes to make and how to interpret them. And they send out, clear instructions on what happens. The scandal is how the Iran team was treated.
We'll get to that. But let me ask you this about the 3 games in general. 3 games, 3 goals robbed by VAR. Was there a pattern there, or were all of them legit?
Every single one was legit. Iran scored 3 offside goals. It's unfortunate. I had a teacher in school who said that almost right is still 100% incorrect.
Yeah.
So, it's one of those things. The offside rule is very clear. You're either on or off. And Iran, unfortunately, was off in 3 games.
In terms of the professionalism of the referees, of the officiating, of the players, the other opposing team. Like, it was totally legit. Iran was treated well by the rank and file of football.
No, they were treated well on the pitch by the referees. The only question mark regarding I have when it comes to a decision is whether or not Romelu Lukaku should have been sent off for the leg, which I think is a little bit of a dubious decision. But even then, I've spoken to referees and people who train referees who are like, a red card there, you can interpret it, but that's a very harsh interpretation.
Yeah.
So no, look, Iran was not on the pitch. Iran was not mistreated by the referees. And what Iran was mistreated off the pitch.
So let's get to that. So, I mean, this was unprecedented, the treatment of the team. I think many people saw that, even Americans. Why didn't more people inside the FIFA system speak out? Why didn't more teams speak out? Why didn't more players speak out? These guys are stars. They have their own, they're multimillionaires. They can talk. They can afford to say something. They talk about and opine about other matters all the time. Why wasn't there more of a vocal protest from the teams and coaches and managers about the treatment of the Iranian team?
Look, I think that's a good question, and I think Amir Qalanoui, the Iranian national team coach, actually spoke about this. He said, if I had seen another national team be treated in this way, I would have spoken out. They didn't. And for whatever reason, I think I don't want to hypothesize or speculate, but I know that when you're in a tournament, you have to focus on what your team is doing and what your players are doing. And I think as a coach and as a player, you don't want to go out and kind of be the person who shifts the focus during that tournament. But that's maybe an explanation. But like you said, they never stop talking about other things, do they?
Yeah.
I mean, the German team in particular, when we saw them put their hands in front of their mouths in the last World Cup to signify whatever the hell they wanted to signify, they didn't say anything. All of these self-proclaimed knights of humanity and freedom of speech, they were all quiet, weren't they?
Yeah.
But
so let's recount the irregularities now that the tournament is over. Now that it appears that Iran is out. What were let us count the ways that Iran's team was abused in this tournament.
Okay, let's start with the situation that the fact that they didn't even get their visas until June 3rd, June 2nd or June 3rd, which meant that they couldn't travel until June 2nd and June 3rd. Now, the time difference between Iran and the United States is what, 9-10 hours? It takes time to get acclimatized to that. It takes time to get used to that. Usually you need 2 weeks for that. So they didn't get that. They got there like a week before.
And most of the other teams did get that.
Yeah. That's standard procedure at every World Cup. I want to reiterate, everything I'm about to bring up here has never been a problem at any World Cup for any team throughout history. This is entirely an American problem, an American government problem. This has never been an issue at any World Cup ever in history, especially not in Russia and Qatar. In Russia, that was probably the best organized World Cup ever. But regardless, this is so that's the first thing. Then when they applied for the visa, so when they traveled to Tijuana, first of all, they had their base camp in Tijuana. They were supposed to be in Tucson, Arizona, but they had their base camp in Tijuana because the US government said they didn't want them there. And Iran said, we don't want to be there because of the situation. And to be fair, Tijuana is not that far off. It's closer to LA than
San Diego.
Yeah, it's so much closer to LA than it is from Tucson, Arizona. So that's one thing. But the problem is, again, 15 members of the staff, 14 members of the staff were not given visas. These included the president of the FA, Mehdi Taj, the general secretary, 2 heads of security, 2 members of the media staff, 2 team analysts. These people you have staff that, and you have all this staff around these national teams because they actually do a job. They help teams prepare. When you take away 15 members of a staff, 4 of them were later allowed in, but 10 members were still missing for 2 games, that throws everything off. That means you have people who are not qualified to do one job having to fill in for others. And that's what happened. Secondly, whenever they entered into the United States, 5-hour delays at immigration every single time.
Seriously?
3, yeah. Every single time. Every single time. And secondly, whenever after the games, usually, you have to do your post-match like physio and rehab and kind of wind down because it reduces injury and it also makes recovery much more easier. these are athletes. These are world-class athletes, right?
Yeah.
So everything matters.
Look, yeah,
But
you
if
know,
you're
I know this too. Like just physically, after I go for a run or boxing or something like that, the last thing you want to do is get on a flight at that point and go through airport security and carry luggage and so on. Yes,
exactly 3 hours that process takes, and they were up in the air as well for a lot of that time. So that was that. Then, and the fact that they were only allowed to be there 24 hours before the two games in LA, they were allowed to be 2 days before in Seattle. That was something they were allowed to. Then you have the situation with the visa of, for example, some players like Torabi, who was only given one visa, so they had to reapply and sort his visa mid-tournament. And then you have the situation with Mehdi Taremi and one of the assistant coaches who were detained at the airport before flying into the last game for 45 minutes and questioned.
because apparently they had to serve in the Revolutionary Guard or something like that.
They were because in Iran military service is mandatory.
Yeah, and let's be clear about this. Let's be clear about this because there's a lot of trash talking and slandering on the internet. These guys in Iran, men are obliged to perform military service, and you definitely don't get a choice whether you go into the regular army or the Revolutionary Guard. They decide where you get put.
And it's mandatory.
Yeah, and you serve for like your 2 years. And I think that a lot of people in the West don't know that. There's been a generation of people who have not had mandatory military service in the West. So they don't understand that in many parts of the world, there's still mandatory military service. Yeah. You have to go. And maybe you go and you decide like, maybe I'll be posted in a slightly better rundown camp or shithole if I pick Sepah versus the army. So they pick IRGC for that 2 years, serving at some border outpost, dusty border outpost, holding an AK-47 for 14 hours a day, basically doing nothing, getting bored off their asses. That's the extent largely of, serving in the IRGC. It's not like they're, plotting schemes to bomb synagogues with Qasem Soleimani. So anyway, please go on.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's exactly that. That's exactly what happened. And so they were questioned and detained again for 45 minutes. They were let in, and then also before, during, and after these games, the line of questioning from the media as well. This non-stop questioning about the politics that have nothing to do with football. The circus around the Pride game in Seattle that ensued, that they did not have a choice in. That was thrust upon them.
Well, it is Pride Month, and in Seattle's a pretty LGBT-friendly city. So, I mean, that's
but the problem there is that this is a FIFA tournament, and FIFA has said that they want to be neutral when it comes to these things. What FIFA said was that if people want to bring the rainbow flag in, they can to the stadium, which is fine, but the fact that they didn't protect their participating teams from something that they know those teams have a problem with. I mean, it's regardless of how you feel about that, you're going to have to accept that there are people in this world who don't agree with you. And personally, I'm 100% transparency. I'm a very socially liberal person. I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God. I do think that these matters and are very important. But I also have the wherewithal to understand and know my history, that I know how these rights were won. They were won when people engaged with people they disagreed with, like civilized human beings, and won them over through the course of time. That's not what we have right now. What we have right now is, I'm right. If you disagree with me, you're Hitler. Screw you. And I'm going to ram my beliefs down your throat. I don't care how you feel. That's not how it works. Yeah. That's not how you win people over. That's not how you win a debate. The marketplace of ideas. Remember that? I mean, it's absurd.
And in this particular situation, you have these, these ideas being essentially crammed down their throats. It's not really a way to win people over.
No.
And by having it by a Western country on a developing country, there's that element as well of cultural imperialism, especially when, not 20, 30 years ago, gays were so horribly discriminated against in the U.S. itself, I mean, brother, the situation, I lived in New York City in the 80s, even in New York City in the 80s, there was, extreme homophobia on the part of some people, and there was still discrimination and so on. This is a recent development in the West, and they're using it as a cudgel against the Muslim world and conservative countries.
Exactly. It's a wedge issue. And the reason they use that is because they want to divide people, because they hate the very notion that people come together from different backgrounds and cultures and so on, because it serves their interest, the powers that be. Let's not kid ourselves. And I mean, it was these same laws that were passed by Putin about 10 years ago. Those are identical to the laws that Margaret Thatcher passed in the UK in the 80s. So, and also let's remember how gay rights was won in the UK, for example. It was when a group of activists, communist socialist activists, decided to align with the miners' strike, with people who they had nothing in common with. And even though the miners lost that strike and they were defeated, the miners remembered who came to their aid. I mean, the same thing can be said in the United States. You saw it was a grassroots people power movement. It was not Coca-Cola ramming down a flag down people's throats. I'm sorry, but that's what this is. This is empty virtue signaling.
So let's go back to the number of transgressions against the Iranian team. And were any of the other teams, in retrospect, were they subjected to, I mean, under this political administration? I know in the beginning there were some visa problems with Iraq. There was some bigotry against a Somali referee and so on. Did those problems persist, or did it basically focus throughout the tournament mostly on systematic disadvantaging of the Iranian team?
No, it was Iran. It was completely on Iran, mostly. There were other teams that also were very, were also in the beginning especially treated poorly, but it was Iran that was systematically treated like absolute crap throughout this. And it was, let me put it to you this, it was so bad that even the Daily Telegraph in the UK. Now, for those of you who don't know what the Daily Telegraph is,
it's very conservative.
We call it the Daily Tory Graph. Okay, it's essentially the unofficial mouthpiece for the Conservative Party. It's the Daily Tory Graph.
They're very, very harsh on the Keir Starmer government for not getting involved in Trump's war against Iran. Yeah.
Even they, on their sports pages, spoke about the systematic oppression and the discrimination of Iran. Look, it's been so bad that, even the most conservative right-wing neocon outlets who, just to maintain some sort of veneer that sports and politics shouldn't mix, have spoken out against this.
Yeah.
Except for the BBC, of course, who does nothing but gaslight. And today I read the most absurd.
Yeah, Nima, listen. I have to go soon because I have something else. But I got to just ask you, were there any other specifics other than the visa problems and the treatment of the teams? Despite those, let's just wrap that up. Iran performed pretty well. They didn't lose anything. They didn't win any game, but they performed pretty well and admirably under those conditions.
I think they carried themselves with the utmost dignity. They carried themselves with the utmost class. They won friends all over the world, because lest we forget, these states and these governments don't necessarily represent the will of their people. I think polling reflects that. But also the way that they were treated by the Mexicans in Tijuana, they got really well. It was a fantastic brotherhood and sisterhood there. There was the way that, every note they wrote on the boards when they left, the way that they carried themselves. They won friends everywhere. They were unlucky, but it's sports. It's unlucky. But for me, I look at it like this. Iran should have done better by their own accord. Regardless of the offsides, you don't miss a penalty. You don't concede those 2 goals against New Zealand in the opening game. You just don't do that. Those were Iran's fault. And Iran has to, I think, on and off the pitch, realize that Iran should not expect help from anyone else, should stand on its own legs and get its shit in order, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
We have to do it ourselves. We shouldn't expect help from anyone.
Nima, who do you like for the Final Four? What are your 4 favorite teams?
Well, now that we've seen the draw, I think France and Spain can play each other in the semi-final. And I think Argentina and Portugal, I can't remember exactly the draw, but I think it's going to be England, Argentina, France, and Spain in the Final Four. I haven't checked the draw just yet. Okay. As many people should know, I live in Europe, and these games are played literally at 4, 5, 6 a.m. So I haven't slept that much over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So I hope you bear with me. But yeah, I do. I still.
So who are those 4 again? For those who are in the betting market, France,
England,
Argentina, England. Oh, I mean, these are all classic winners in the World Cup, so it wouldn't be any huge surprise. Who's the underdog, and who's the potential wild card that could advance, that could surprise people?
I think the surprise team of the tournament is going to be Norway. I thought that before the tournament, and I think that's still now. I think Erling Haaland is just unbelievable. I think he's going to win the Golden Boot, and I thought that before the tournament. I think that again. I think he's going to score 8-9 goals. I think Norway will reach minimum a quarterfinal.
Nima Tavallaei, thank you so much for joining me again. Let's talk later too, if you ever get a chance. Okay, great.
Absolutely. Keep in touch, and good to be with you.
Great. Nima Tavallaei, world-renowned currently sports journalist focusing on Team Iran and Team Italy. Hey, thank you so much for listening or watching. This is Badlands. I'm Borzou Deragahi. You can find me at Borzou, BORZOU.substack.com. I'm also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on YouTube.